going straight into it, on my left-hand side, you've heard from the Honorary Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta. The only thing I'll say over and above his profile is a fellow alumni of Morgan Stanley as well. So welcome, Ken. Then I go straight into Dr. Addison. You've seen his profile. I will mention that he went to Fancy Film as well. So I will give you that one. But more importantly, he's the governor of Bank of Ghana. So welcome to you as well. And then we have Rahul Gopinath, which you've heard on the profile as well, ECOM, a major sponsor of this event today. So welcome to Rahul as well. And last but not least, my good friend, Mr. Tutu Agyare, who I have to say, being a banker in the UK before I moved to the US, he was one of the people we used to emulate. So he was a fellow banker from UBS, and as I was growing up, he's been a mentor all the way through, and he continues to be a mentor. So welcome to Tutu Agyare, who's a founding partner of Nubuke Investments as well. So we're going to go straight into the questions, and the way I'm going to try and look at the format is I'll ask maybe a couple of questions each to each of you. And I'm very keen to have audience participation as well. And so we'll go straight into the audience, and then if there are no questions, trust me, I have a lot of questions to be able to ask the panel here. But the theme, as you've seen, is that we're going to really focus on Ghana's economy and economic and financial outlook, all right? So I promise you won't go through a lot of the numbers, but it's more around thinking about the macro economy of Ghana, and also then looking at it from the other side, which is the private sector side, and saying, is it actually working? Because clearly we have the finance minister and the governor here, but we also have two practitioners on the other side as well who can tell us to balance the whole conversation. So let me start straight away going to the honorary minister and asking you, 3 years into the job,
yes.
2019, give me a sense around your real achievements in 2019 as a finance minister and as economy. And more importantly, what is your outlook for 2020? Where do you see some of the risks and opportunities, and what do we need to do overall to be able to mitigate some of those and take advantage of the opportunities?
Well, that's loaded, Peter. So 3 years on, less hair, what is left is more gray, and not much sleep. But Governor and I are getting to know each other well to try and manage the resources. But I think it's been an incredible year. We started with really strong headwinds, as you know, and I think there was a lot of cynicism and skepticism as to what the president had pronounced with regards to sort of a new sense of policy, clarity, transparency, and then to build credibility back after derailing from the IMF program. So the numbers so far have been very good, all trending in the right direction. But I don't think we're out of the woods yet. I mean, we want to target, beyond 1-2 years of foreign exchange cover. We want to make sure that the macro stability is really there for investors to be comfortable and confident about the environment they are coming into. And more importantly, also want to train our people so that we are ready for a population that has a capacity to relearn and have the tools fit for the fourth industrial revolution. So that's where we are, and I think what we have done with regards to the flagship programs, Minister of Agriculture is here, just phenomenal, where we are actually exporting some produce before we had bumper harvests these past 2 years, and that's indicative of just changing the macros. With regards to industrialization, Minister of Trade is here in terms of changing the whole infrastructure for value add and the whole automotive industry that we are tackling. And the areas, as we talk about, of welfare services, i.e. the preferential option for the poor, to ensure that there's a sense of social mobility and a sense of equity, even as we create wealth I think that's going very well, the senior high school program. So we're really trying to balance out how we develop so that everybody participate and still build a platform that would encourage private sector to lead that. We're still struggling with the issue of revenue mobilization, and I think we need a stronger digitalization intervention to support that and break the leakages. We have a change in management at Ghana Revenue Authority, and I think we all concede that they did a phenomenal job in December this year, and that portends then for a certain change in attitude, which will be helpful in the years. So we are really excited about where they are, but digitalization has to come into play. So Peter, generally we feel comfortable that we are building a platform and a framework which will encourage the type of savings and investment that are required to propel our country into a transformed society. And there are various other things. I think this December we all witnessed the Year of Return. And that was phenomenal because it actually opened up to us a whole stream of potential investors and investment that we had not anticipated. And that's the exciting thing about connecting with the diaspora, giving them rootedness and a home, and also looking to build on their capacity in terms of knowledge and also resources to help develop our infrastructure.
Thank you, Ken. And by the way, congratulations to the Year of Return. Just so that you're aware, I was playing golf last week, and I got paired with two Americans from nowhere. And they asked me, where are you from? I said, I'm from Ghana. They says, why are you here? Why are you not at the Year of Return? That is amazing to see that this thing travels all the way through. So congratulations on that. Let me turn to Dr. Addison. So you're coming to 3 years in the job, I believe, since April, I believe you got 3 years ago. So same question to you. It's interesting, I don't see a lot of gray hair on you, but I guess 3 years down, you probably shaved just before.
Less.
But clearly you've been through quite a lot of challenges, but at the same time, recognizing that you are putting the right framework, the right policies in place to be able to move the country forward. So can you give me a sense around, again, from your point of view, how things have been and what you see as the priorities and outlook for 2020?
Peter, I think we've done a lot of work over the last 3 years. I mean, you'll recollect that we came in at a time that the economy was almost in a crisis with high inflation, currency depreciation, slow growth, and all of that. And we had to put into place a macro policy framework which restored stability. The implication of steadfastly implementing that policy of fiscal consolidation, tight monetary policies, etc., was a rapid disinflation process that we saw throughout 2017 and the early part of 2018. You would recollect that in 2018, because of the developments in the global environment and the Fed tightening of policy rates, we had issues with the Ghanaian cedi exchange rate during May and June 2018. And that was about the time that this phase, this consolidation process with rapid disinflation seemed to have, sort of stabilized. And therefore, you would see that our policy rates kept being lowered till around that point when the Monetary Policy Committee decided to keep the policy rate on hold and observe the developments from then on. And we kept that policy rate unchanged till January 2018, a year ago, when we thought the global conditions had changed, allowing us to bring the policy rate down a little further, to help anchor the disinflation process, and also in view of the plans for the private sector to lower interest rates generally in the economy. But then you would recollect what had happened. The cedi reacted very badly because there were doubts about the commitment of the government after the IMF was gone and all of that. And since then, the Bank of Ghana hasn't lowered the policy rate till now. That, in a sense, for me, reflects that yes, we've made a lot of progress in terms of bringing stability. But since our inflation rate got into the range of 7.8, 7.6, you see that we've been hovering around that range, that narrow range of 7.6, 7.8, almost as if to say we've reached the best that we could. But some of us believe that we can do better, that we can bring inflation rates further down, closer to 5 or 6, but certainly not 7 or 8. We think we can also do better in terms of keeping the city more stable. So essentially, this is where we are. We spent 2019 essentially trying to build buffers. And if you look at the statistics, you would see that we built as much as 1.8 billion US dollars in terms of reserves, in the hope that if there are any shocks in 2019, which is also an election year, the central bank would be in a better position to moderate the impact of those types of shocks. So we are very hopeful. We are hopeful that the stability will be maintained. We need to tighten policy a little bit more to really tie down the consolidation and bring inflation and interest rates further down.
Okay. Thank you. And let's touch on elections. I'll come back to you. Let's talk about Rahul first. Well, let's talk about on the other side. In terms of 2 years ago, you were here, you were on the panel. I interviewed you, you were very bullish about Ghana. 2 years down the line, clearly the reason why you're here and the reason why you're sponsoring this, I'm assuming you can remain bullish about Ghana. So if that is the case, can you just give me a sense around why you continue to be very bullish about Ghana and what do you see as some of the future opportunities for ECOM as an organization as well?
So we haven't been just bullish on Ghana just for 2 years. We have been in Ghana for 20. And ECOM is a 170-year-old company. So we do investments very carefully, but when we do it for a very, very long time with our best partners possible. And Ghana as a country has been one of our best operating countries and a partnership which we cherish. I would say Ken and Dr. Addison have both talked a lot about the macro side and how that has actually improved. I would talk a little bit more about the micro side. So one of the issues with developing countries when they go for development is that you have pockets of development. So you have certain cities which will grow faster and the rest of the country actually grows much slower, which means that you will have people moving from rural areas, agriculture, where we are based, into the cities, particularly young people. And that's almost like a brain drain from the most critical sector on agriculture. One of the biggest policies which the government has followed, the Planting for Food and Jobs scheme, and the policies of Cocoa Board have both ensured over the last 3 years this development has been across the country. So we see more number of young farmers coming into doing farming. More people, even in this particular forum, asking us questions about how to go back to doing agriculture. Remember, Ghana is in the center of Africa, but it's also the most prosperous in terms of land and water. And agriculture still is the bedrock of Ghanaian economy. And being able to improve that and continuing to improve that is critical for us, and I would say critical for Ghana itself.
Okay. Thank you. And Tutu, so you're a man who was in the UK. I know you're Ghanaian and you spent time in Ghana and you decided to set up Nubuke investment in Ghana and you spend most of the time in Ghana these days. So can you get a sense, if you're an investor here thinking about and really being bullish about Ghana, give me a sense around what is advice you give to people on the ground in terms of where you see the opportunities, where you see some of the potential risks, but actually it is risk of emerging markets and there's a risk of just the cost of doing business. So give me a sense around how would you advise an investor here?
I think I'd like to talk about some of the things that we've done, because it's very easy to have big and wide conversations about the things one should do and read from the textbook. But over the last 3 years, the first advisory mandate we got was to take a multinational corporation who was just about to divest its assets in Ghana, and working with the Minister of Natural Resources, we turned that divestment around. It turned into $1 billion 4-year investment. And on Wednesday, I'll be up in Obuasi at the official launch of the $1 billion, 400,000 ounce a year restart of the Obuasi mine, which was only facilitated by government policy and multinational, and working with ministers and regulators to ensure that the economic environment worked. So that's something that I can talk to very positively. We are working on a $400 million sugar project in the north of Ghana, which will bring huge transformation, 10,000 hectares, 8,000 jobs. Working across ministries. The Minister of Agriculture is here. He's heavily involved positively. The Minister for Trade and Industry is here. The Minister of Finance is helping to provide some of the concessions. We're halfway through the process. And, between our Ghanaian and Mauritian counterparts, we fully expect to have this project up and running to get to FID by the close of this year. We successfully participated in the more recent bid round, very transparent, with multinationals, and we managed to acquire some assets, and we're in the process of going through the regulatory and parliamentary processes for that as well. And we're also involved in the government's digitization agenda, and working very closely with a consortium of local companies to help the Ministry of Finance digitize all of its payments, so you'll be able to sit in the comfort of your own home and make all of your interactions with government digital and as easy as possible. So my perception is not one of sitting outside and hearing all the nice stories and saying, well, let me go back and see. Mine is one of successfully and continuously executing high-value transactions for multinationals, for local companies, with a government which is open and receptive to business. Absolutely, there are challenges, and some of the challenges surround the fact that you have to be there. You cannot do it by remote control. You cannot sit in London and send people down. You have to have FaceTime. You have to make the time. You have to be sensitive to the needs of the country, because no longer can you come in with a list of demands and expect that all your demands will be accepted. But actually, this is a country who wants to develop by itself. This is a country who these days has the expertise to be able to face off to you in a manner which means that there's a much more equitable balance of profits as well as development. And we work across Africa. These are a number of transactions we've done in Ghana, and so far at the moment it has been easier to do transactions in Ghana than almost any other country we operate in. So I would talk about our personal experience, talk about our successes, and really, we are, like many other private sector investors, are a testament to the fact that it's significantly easier to business in continent, but it takes a lot of hard work and focus and determination, but you'll get there.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious you have to leave, so I want to ask you one question, and if you don't mind, I put it to the audience to see what other questions they have before you leave. Maybe take 1 or 2 questions from the audience. But before I do that, clearly one of the potential elephants in the room will be election year. And so people always get nervous around election year, although, frankly speaking, Ghana has been probably one of the best African countries when it comes to elections itself and the stability around elections. So can you give me a sense around how you see the election year going? And in particular, how would you propose to maintain the Ghana's revenue growth, the growth story in the election year as well?
Well, Peter, that is the elephant in the room. And I'm sure when we get on the roadshow, that will be the question that's also put to us. But I think really, if you look at the discipline and that we've gone through these 3 years, it's really indicative of the clarity that we have, that we cannot really compromise on the issues of the macro stability, because it's really foundational. And I think we've done a great job. As Governor mentioned, when we did state that we're exiting the IMF program, there was a lot of uncertainty and it impacted our currency. and we proved that even after exiting, we've kept faith with what we promised. So we've done it this past year, and we promulgated certain laws in Parliament with regards to the Fiscal Responsibility Act to ensure that we are below 5% and also have a positive primary balance. So those are key, and we stuck to it this year, and we'll continue. We stuck to it in 2019, and we will continue. The issue then becomes fiscal. Where are the revenue resources to make sure that you don't overspend? And these are the changes that we are having at Agyare. I think expenditure control, we've proven over the 3 years that we have the mettle to be able to do that. And we do that without necessarily compromising on key flagship areas, which goes to the heart of building a transformed economy. So I would say that investors should have faith with us. I think it was in 2004 that our senior minister, who was then finance minister, was able to ensure that he did not jeopardize the macro numbers. He is now the senior minister. It's the same philosophy of government. And I just want to assure investors that we are very, very clear on this as a way of sustaining the growth and making sure that the platform moves in a positive trajectory, and we'll continue with that. We've done it 3 years. We'll continue to do that. The president is very clear about that. So that's assurance. But also, with the Fiscal Responsibility Act, there was an innocuous line which said that the Minister for Finance will be sanctioned if I breach it. So that's something I'm not looking forward to. And reputation of the government, personal reputation, friends that we have in the investor community. We've been very successful with our Eurobonds, and we want to make sure that the returns that they have are assured. So, Peter, that's what I would
Thank you.
say.
And for the avoidance of doubt, that's the finance minister. So, can I just go straight to the audience to see if we've got at least 1 or 2 questions from the audience?
How do you go about deciding, in terms of the weight of money coming in, where the best deal is for Ghana?
We do have sort of a debt ceiling, and the amount of debt that government is going to sign up to each year. So that becomes a defining factor. And then under that, you run the numbers to see what is best for you. But I think even, for example, if you look at what we are doing with the securitization of our royalties, that will bring in equity money. That is helpful. Just going off your normal stream of income, let's assume that I think this is the first time since the civil rights that African Americans, about 2 million of them, will be getting pensions, for example. Okay, so that's almost minimum $17,000 to $20,000 per person. Okay, so that's what, $40 billion. So assume that you take even the year of return as a new business model, and you are going to attract these 100 or 200,000 of these into your country, working with the Bank of Ghana to see the type of accounts we can do for them. That's a whole stream of different resources that we now have suddenly been open to, sort of hidden treasures being open to us. So I think it's also a period of really understanding what the diasporan community means and how we are going to be able to use that to replace debt. Debt You have to make sure you are not debt distressed when it happens. And as we strengthen our economy, there will be less need for government to offer a guarantee, which is important. People will be able to begin to take risks themselves because we have the type of stability and environment. Successful regional platform because of the African Free Continental Trade Agreement means that you have scalability and an ability to then serve, the 350 million West Africa market or the billion and change Africa market. So I think it's a good time in which we can be very choosy about what is good for us and what's not good for the Republic, and also offer an environment in which you're taking the risk. It's kind of calculable, and you'll be able to do that. So the key is to be able to find a way to cascade in that type of capital. And today we signed an agreement with the London Stock Exchange, which is going to the heart of the matter. But I think some principal issues that the President also brought out yesterday is the whole question of whether the current global financial architecture is suitable for the transformation of Africa. These were done 75 years ago with Bretton Woods to support Western development and infrastructure build-up. I think by 2050, we're going to be a quarter of the world's population in Africa, about 40% of the youth, the largest consumer market. What new architecture is appropriate for this? Because if Africa does not develop by 2050, the world is in jeopardy. So I think things are going to change. We're going to challenge the orthodoxy and find means of removing this African premium lending to us, because it will be a good place to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, and I must excuse Ken to leave.
Is there any projection as to when the micro side of things will be felt by the larger population in the country?
It's sort of interesting hearing that, because if you look at some of the things that we are trying to do in the banking sector, for example, these are things that really impact at the micro level. Even though I described that we had inherited an economy in crisis, and we thought the focus was going to be on consolidation, but we also needed to put into place, rework the entire banking system. We had inherited banking organizations that had very weak capital. At the time, 120 million, most of the banks were capitalized at less than $30 million. These were not the type of banks that were going to create jobs and create employment. And what we have done is to recapitalize the banks in Ghana. At the time that we announced the recapitalization program, that was almost 100 million for each bank. There were a lot of doubts as to whether the Ghanaian banks would be able to get recapitalized. Quite a number of them ended up getting recapitalized. There's just a few, 4 or so banks needing assistance from the Ghana Amalgamated Trust. So yes, there are things that are being done which impacts people directly, if that is how you to interpret the issue of the micro. The issue of the resolution of the banks. There were banks that were not able to meet depositor payments. Some of those banks, UT Bank, Capital Bank, these were banks that were not able to meet the customer demands for withdrawal. There were fights going on in banking halls. People were being beaten up in banking halls in Ghana. And I think that through the resolution exercise that we went through, resolving banks that were not functioning properly. Today, all the banks that are licensed in Ghana are liquid. There are no issues of customers not being able to access their deposits in the banks. In addition to that, some of the banks that were resolved, the government has had to provide resources to pay out, deposits that were locked up in those weak banks, and the receiver is currently, meeting up with those payments. These things impact people's lives directly, and I think Ghanaians are better off today because of those types of interventions that were put into place.
Thank you. And this is an important question, so I'm going to ask all the panel to comment on that as well. So that, Rahul?
In our view, the micro has already started showing. I can give you a few indicators or data points. MTN, which is the largest mobile phone company, had for the first time their earnings out of mobile money transactions exceeding their earnings out of data and voice call. It shows democratization of financial flows. Financial flows, mobile money is the way to get there. And you can see a lot more Ghanaians using that. On the back of that, you have fintechs starting out. If you go to the Ghana Impact Hub in Accra and other similar tech-based hubs, you would see a lot more fintech companies coming up, which are basing themselves on these technologies. Micro-insurance has been going up. You would see fisher folk in the coastal areas of Cape Coast and in Takoradi actually getting access to micro-insurance through innovative products available on the market, giving them for the first time access to healthcare beyond NHS, beyond the NHIS healthcare which was available. I can see, for example, if you go into a supermarket in Ghana, you would see for the first time in, I would say, 20 years of me being in Ghana, made in Ghana products coming up in the supermarkets and whole sections of the supermarket having made in Ghana products. In the past, you would only see made in Europe, Asia, somewhere imported into the country, and you'd see that growing. Village communities and marketplaces, the weekly market days are much more vibrant, partly because you've got more food available, the foods have to be sold, you have more than what is available for your home to sell in the market. And if you go down to these marketplaces, you would see yams, tomatoes, other things being sold out. Again, something which over the last 3 years has grown in vibrancy. So from where we sit, we see that micro indicators starting to show. And as I said in my past comments, the macro, for the first time, is reflecting in a widespread micro. And that is what we think is the most aggressive pitch for investing in Ghana.
Thank you. Tutu?
I mean, I would agree with you that the trickle-down hasn't happened as quickly as many would like. I think the contrast between what I would call the almost reckless granting of credit prior to this administration, which meant that it was very easy to get, you didn't have to do anything for it, and you were able to run your businesses, it's now been replaced by something which is much more long-term and sustainable. You have to be registered, you have to be legitimate. And so I think these things just take a little time to translate. If you look at the banking sector numbers are very healthy. The weakest bit is their loan-to-deposit ratio. The loan-to-deposit ratio, in my personal opinion, are woefully inadequate. They haven't been lending as much as they used to in the past, and so therefore there is still, but the good thing means there's a lot of untapped potential available for the banks now that they've settled to start to give credit. And the reality is that we can't grow our country without credit, and people's perception about how hard things are is normally because you can't get access to money and funding. But you've also got to remember that the free SHS program has put a lot of money in people's pockets, because there must be at least 200,000 or 300,000 families who are not having to pay for secondary education, which in itself is more than, you normally spend about 3,000-4,000 cedis a year. So there's a lot more money which people don't, it's not like credit is available, it's like money you didn't have to spend in the past. So sometimes people don't necessarily think about that as money in their pockets, because it's money they don't have to spend on other things. I do think, though, over the course of the next few years, my colleague here, Rahul, mentioned fintech and the provision of the much easier provision of credit. Microinsurance, which means that you no longer have to trudge for miles to go and get an insurance policy. You can actually almost do it on demand for specific purposes. The revamp and the payment of the National Health Service means that for a lot of things that, the cash and carries are disappearing. So I think that over the course of the next few years, you will see the comments that you made, sir, about, it's tough now, will start to disappear as more and more of the policies and processes that were set up by the government. And I'm not a mouthpiece for the government, I'm just somebody who invests and relies very heavily on credit being available to my customers to be able to buy the goods that we're trying to invest in and sell. So we're still very optimistic, having understood the issues that this government has faced. And if anything at all, those issues and the magnitude and the cost of resolving those things was a little bit too understated. So therefore, I don't think people appreciated how much has gone into setting a very, very solid base up for people like myself to come in or bring investors in, because I'm very comfortable that, the policies that are being set will allow us to deliver the returns back to our investors who are either in Ghana or abroad.
Thank you. Charles.
Thank you. I think a lot has been said, so I'll add very little. I think it's all relative. A lot of people complain or might say that times are hard and they're not feeling it on the ground. But yet when you go into the villages and you talk to the people there, it's a whole different story. The Agric Minister is here. I think we've done phenomenally well on the availability of food and the price of food. And, as far as that is concerned, in the villages, you see that the food is abundant and is available. And so on that record, in terms of putting food on the table and be able to feed your family and have 3 meals a day, I think we've done a lot. In the cities where people are more reliant on easy credit and availability of credit, there's been a lot of tightening. And that is reflected in the numbers you see today. The fiscal consolidation has led to inflation decline and so forth and so on. And I think Tutu's point is a very well made one, in the sense that there was too much liquidity or too much available credit. And that was because the banks and the financial institutions were not really adhering to proper principles. And you have one particular bank that, single-handedly, in my opinion, distorted the real estate sector, because they were buying up every house that came up available. And that led to ridiculous increase in prices, which ended up being liquidity in a lot of pockets of people who had real estate to sell. But it was artificial. Now that has gotten back to, has corrected itself, and we are seeing the real prices out there. We've also had maybe some challenges due to the closure of some of these MFIs with the delivery of credit. First, the availability of credit to the private sector and the delivery of it. I think the digital fintechs are stepping into that space to provide that delivery of credit. Also, the central bank has reduced the primary reserve requirements from 10% to 8%, which now means that the banks can make available more capital to lend, specifically to the SME sector, which I think bore the brunt of the closure of a lot of these MFIs. And that is what the challenge is, really trying to deliver credit to SMEs and find an efficient way to do so within the environment. And I think the digital fintech will really lend a hand in that space. I think the year of the return was quite an eye-opener. If you speak to the taxi drivers, the Uber drivers, they're like, whoa, people have money, made a phenomenal amount of money this Christmas. Bottles of water were selling for like 20 cedis, and people were buying it all over the place. All the places, you couldn't find a restaurant to go to. It's fully booked. Hotels were fully booked. And yes, there was a lot of entry or a lot of visitors around, but also the spending power. You just realize that there actually is quite a lot of consumer spending power locally. And we see that also in the retail market. So I think sometimes, we like to say it's hard so that people will feel sorry for us, but I think it's a lot better and it's a lot more stable. So, you should take it with a grain of salt. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Okay. Tutu, I think you want to say something?
I actually wanted to talk a little bit about an opportunity and something that happened last year in addition to Year of Return, which I think surprised everybody, which was the Made in Ghana rice issue, where a number of people rose up and said, we've produced all this rice due to some fantastic policies in the ministry, and guess what, we can't sell it. And there was an extraordinary mobilization of domestic resources to the point where actually Made in Ghana rice is now difficult to get a hold of because people were so patriotic about buying rice which was grown and sold this year rather than the stuff that was imported, even to the point where some of the importers were rebagging foreign imported rice with Made in Ghana bags. I mean, who could believe that? So I do think that for those of you who are coming to invest here, I think that there's, as part of Ghana Beyond Aid, there's another narrative around backing locally made products, because I think that is an area that the assumption that people only want to buy things that are made outside of the country was completely destroyed this year. And I think it's something, that's an opportunity that even in my company, we've got a bunch of young kids working on, trying to bring investors and look at those opportunities. I just wanted to mention that because it was a phenomenon that we've never seen before,
Honestly, this is a very good point.
and one that we have to leverage off of.
Now, I need to take one more question, please. This is a very important panel, so let me just take one more question.
In which ways do you intend to reinforce your partnership with Ivory Coast in the production and refinement of cocoa, and how will it improve the lives of farmers, given the Sustainable Development Goal to eradicate poverty in Ghana?
We are working closely with Ivorians. I think between the two of us, we're responsible for about 60% of the exports. We've been exporting cocoa for God knows how long. We really haven't added any value, and we're really focused on adding value to the whole value chain, encouraging more local processing. We've entered into some agreements with the African Development Bank that has provided a facility to both ourselves and Ivory Coast towards improving not only putting in place factories or paying for factories, but also improving the livelihood of the farmers by doing we've started the pension program where farmers are going to qualify for a pension by contributing a portion of their income towards a pension fund, so that when they retire at 70 or 65, they have a pension to help them through. Because right now they don't have anything, and so they end up, farming to the old, and there's nothing to keep them going once they retire or they get too weak to be able to farm. So that's a huge initiative that Cocoa Board is pushing with some private sector partnership. Also, in terms of hand pollination and educating the farmers in how to increase the productivity of their farms is a very important one. I think right now, I don't know the exact numbers, the MD might be able to tell, but the amount of yield we get per acre is quite low and is way below the average, and so it's something that we have to focus on trying to improve. But this is not my field, and both the Agric Minister and the MD for Cocoa Board, so I have to be careful what I say.
The thing about Africa and in Ghana is that, as you can hear, the opportunities definitely do exist, but you must focus and you must look for those opportunities. I think if you want to be being abroad and not being on the ground, as Yofi talked about, to really see, feel, and actually get things done, then you miss the opportunities. But you must focus. And I always like to finish off by this joke that I always make, because it brings home why you must focus about things in Africa. And this is about a gentleman that used to travel from Ghana to Nigeria on his motorbike. Most of you have heard this. And every day he will travel from Ghana to Nigeria on his motorbike. He has 2 black bags on it. He gets to the customs officer, and the customs officer will ask him, why are you coming to Nigeria, and what do you have in the 2 black bags? And he will say, sawdust. Then you go past. The next day he will come back, same thing. What do you have in your bag? Sawdust. Day 5, he comes in and the customs officer says to him, you cannot be coming from Ghana to Nigeria every day and you say to me that on your motorbike you have sawdust in those 2 black bags. What are you actually smuggling into Nigeria? And he turns around and says, motorbikes. Okay? So ladies and gentlemen, look for the motorbike and not the sawdust. Okay? On that note, thank you to all the stakeholders.